welcome into the 8th edition of Sports with Steve. You can obviously tell that something special is going on today because, 1, Scott is on camera, and 2, we're both wearing ties.
Hi, Mom.
So if Scott's mom's watching, hi, Mom. Hi, Scott's mom. Okay, now we're on to the show. Today, we have a little special segment. I'm going to give my winners and losers for each team in the NFL. And the winners and losers, it won't change depending on who wins the Super Bowl. If Denver wins or Seattle wins, that won't change on my list here. But before we do that, I have a couple of notes that I want to get out to you guys. Eric Rivera, a suspect in the shooting of Sean Taylor in 2007 in a burglary, and a shot where Sean Taylor was home because he was injured, so he didn't go on the road to Tampa Bay. It was a Washington Redskins safety. People broke into his house. Sean Taylor was still there. Came up firing with the machete. Was shot in the leg, which if you're going to get shot somewhere, the leg is the safest place to get shot because it only has one main vein/artery, and that's right on the bone. And there's a lot of room to get shot to where you're not going to get hurt. Well, it was a freak incident where the burglars were spooked. Sean Taylor got shot in the leg in the artery and subsequently died due to his injuries. That was back in 2007. As of this week, Eric Rivera, one of 4 suspects involved in the shooting, was sentenced to 57 years in prison. So even though that was 6.5 years ago that Sean Taylor was killed, a little slice of justice is served for the family of Sean Taylor and for the NFL world, because Sean Taylor was a great man and he was going to be a great football player, which isn't nearly as important as being a great man. Bills hired defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, former Lions head coach. If you remember, Jim Schwartz was fired after the 7-9 season with the Detroit Lions. Jim Caldwell's coming in, offensive-minded, to be the head coach of the Lions and hopefully bring some discipline. The final head coaching spot in the NFL has been taken. Mike Pettine is now going to be the Cleveland Browns head coach. He's been a defensive coordinator for the last 5 years, I believe the last 4 with the New York Jets. All 5 years, his defenses have been top 10 in the league, so a good defensive mind. He hasn't had much, if any, head coaching experience anywhere. We'll see how he does. Cleveland's kind of a wide-open job. They have good defense already. They have great draft picks. It's one of the better prospects for a head coach. And a Super Bowl note I want to get out to you guys. The AFC West in 2011, with all 4 teams, was 31-33. The AFC West this year, 37-27. The NFC West in 2011 was 30-34. With one of those teams being the 49ers, who went 13-3. So 13 of those wins, 13 of the 30 wins came from one team.
Wow.
This year, the NFC West, 42-22. So a marked improvement over the last 2 years.
Wow.
2 years ago, of course, was when Tim Tebow took the Denver Broncos to the Super Bowl and beat the Steelers in the first round with the first ever new rules overtime game. I believe it was a slant pattern to Demaryius Thomas, 80 yards, touchdown. Broncos went on to get smashed by the New England Patriots. Okay, so let's begin our winners and losers. And I have 12 teams that are winners, 10 that are losers, and 10 that I don't really feel changed much. And my qualifications for what a winner and a loser are: teams that improved from last year and or lived up to their expectations for this year. So not necessarily, so record isn't necessarily the deciding factor. Playoff appearance is not necessarily the deciding factor. So let's go ahead and get started. Scott here will be listing the teams. We'll start off with the 10 teams that I believe did not change their expectations and what they needed to do this year. So Scott, who was the first team?
The first team was the Buffalo Bills.
Okay, the Buffalo Bills went 6-10 this year. They're in the middle of the NFL in all statistics. They have not been that great the last few years. Granted, they have the New England Patriots in their division, so it's hard to really be the best in that division with Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. But they had a chance. They just kind of sputtered. They had a couple of games where they looked really good, and then a lot of games where they looked really bad. But I don't believe that last year's record and this year's expectations really changed all that much. I don't really expect anything new for them next year. So, Buffalo Bills, first team that did not change their expectations. Second team,
San Francisco 49ers.
San Francisco 49ers went 12-4 this year, made their 3rd straight NFC title game, 2nd straight with Colin Kaepernick. took on the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. San Francisco hasn't beat Seattle for a long time in Seattle. Hardly anybody has beat Seattle in Seattle in a long time. I think that if they would have won, that would have made them one of my top winners. But because they lost to Seattle, they couldn't quite get over that hump. You know, people were talking about Colin Kaepernick having a down year. They went 12-4. I don't believe it was a down year. They just weren't running the read option as much. Second best team in the best division, but the fact that they could not beat Seattle in the playoffs, could not beat them in Seattle in the regular season, barely beat them at home 19-17 on a field goal with 26 seconds left. They just didn't look all that impressive, and it was a good game. I mean, we all know the Sherman post-game interview, and the, you know, we all know that, but I think the 49ers didn't really change their expectations much. They were kind of expected to go to the Super Bowl, but a lot of people expected Seattle to go to the Super Bowl over them. And Seattle did go to the Super Bowl over them. So who was my third team?
The St. Louis Rams.
St. Louis Rams were the fourth best team in the best division. Granted, that also means they were the worst team in the best division, but they went 7-9 without Sam Bradford. Sam Bradford has gotten a lot of flack for not being as good, per se, as he was expected to be. Number one draft pick, one of the highest salaries for a rookie ever. I think Matthew Stafford eclipsed that, or it was the other way around. Back-to-back years, number one pick. 7-9 without Sam Bradford. They played fairly well. They played San Francisco well. They played Seattle well. They played Arizona well. They're a tough team, and I look for them to be improving in the future, but I think that their expectations, especially with Sam Bradford being out, I think they met their expectations, but they didn't necessarily improve on their expectations. I don't think they really changed anything from last year to this year. Next.
The Jacksonville Jaguars.
Jacksonville Jaguars lost 8 straight games and then won 4 of their next 5. So I think they went 4-12. Is that right?
Yes, they did.
4-12. They beat Tennessee. They beat Houston. Everybody beat Houston. But their team didn't really improve, and they didn't really get a whole lot worse. You know, starting off 0-8, you know, you would think that the team would get a whole lot worse. But there haven't been many expectations for Jacksonville in quite a while. They haven't been good for quite a while, since 2007 or 2008, when they were second in the division or third in the division with a 10-6 or a 9-7 record. Maurice Jones-Drew, David Garrard, you know, those guys really played well. But lately, Jacksonville has just been mediocre, and I believe that will remain next year. So I don't. And last year they weren't all that great either. So no change for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next team.
The next team is the Cleveland Browns.
Cleveland Browns, 4-12. They started off slow, then won a couple of games with Brian Hoyer. Brandon Weeden had a good season last year, the 28-year-old rookie, Brandon Weeden, but then he struggled this year, got injured. Brian Hoyer had a couple of good games, got injured. Jason Campbell stepped in, didn't really play all that well. They now have their head coach in Mike Pettine, defensive-minded. Their defense was one of the best rushing defenses in all the NFL, and they only went 4-12. I look for them to get better in the future, but as far as last year and this year's expectations, I do not believe that they improved on that. They traded away Trent Richardson to the Indianapolis Colts for a first-round pick, so they have a couple of first-round picks and good options for the future. I look for them to get pretty better. That's not really English syntax. To get better in the near future. With Pittsburgh kind of falling off, you never know what you're going to get with Cincinnati. Baltimore is a toss-up. So I think Cleveland could really improve. And once again, I'll make the point, John Jennings, Cleveland Browns. Keep that in mind. Okay, next team.
The next team is the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pittsburgh Steelers, staying in the AFC West. They went 8-8, but they started off 0-6, and they almost backed into the playoffs. If San Diego would have lost, they would have made the playoffs, which is kind of crazy to think about it. An 0-6 team to start the season, going 8-8, winning 8 of their last 10, making the playoffs. You know, a lot of people have told the Pittsburgh Steelers and talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers about how they're old. All of their main defensive backs are over the age of 30, and Clark and Polamalu and a couple others. But they also just looked old. You know, you can be old and play young, or you can be young and play old, or in this case, you can be old and play old. They just looked slow. Ben Roethlisberger was throwing passes high all season, at least to start the season. He got a lot better towards the end of the season. No real change. I don't think that many people had many expectations for them this year. I don't think it will change much. in the future. Next team.
The next team is the Indianapolis Colts.
Once again, just because they won their division and had an 11-5 record and made the playoffs and beat the Kansas City Chiefs and the tie for the second biggest comeback in playoff history with a 28-point deficit, don't think they really changed much. They had the exact same record as they did last year. I think it was a good sign for Andrew Luck to be able to not fit into that sophomore slump, but they had one of the worst divisions in football, where the second best team was Tennessee with a 7-9 record, and they really didn't play like they had a 7-9 record. They played like they had a 4-12 record. Indianapolis just, to me, did not get a whole lot better, but they didn't necessarily get worse. You know, it's hard to have an 11-5 season and get worse. Andrew Luck threw a lot of interceptions in the playoffs. He has to fix that. He could be a dynamic quarterback, but he just needs to get to that next step. And I think losing Reggie Wayne, you know, they got T.Y. Hilton going, and he was a big improvement, but having T.Y. Hilton on the right side and having Reggie Wayne on the left side is going to be very important for them in the future, along with Coby Fleener as the tight end. Trent Richardson needs to pick it up with the Indianapolis Colts. So Andrew Luck, you know, people have compared Andrew Luck to Peyton Manning, saying that Andrew Luck is not nearly as good as Peyton Manning, or that it's unfair to qualify him as Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning took a while to make the playoffs too. Took a while to really, I mean, he didn't win a Super Bowl until his 7th year in the league, you know, in 2006 against the Chicago Bears. So you guys need to relax on Andrew Luck. It's going to take a little bit, and he's in the AFC with some of the best quarterbacks in all of football. You know, he's with Tom Brady, he's with Phillip Rivers, he's with Alex Smith, who I think is a very, very good quarterback. He's with Peyton Manning, so I think it's very unfair to expect him to be that great that early. Not many quarterbacks ever have done that. So not much of an improvement, but not a deficit either for the Indianapolis Colts. Who was my next team that didn't change?
The Green Bay Packers.
Green Bay Packers, 8-7-1, with their top tie coming against the Minnesota Vikings. They lost Rodgers to a left collarbone break. They played well against San Francisco in the wild card round of the playoffs. I think that this was no change, because it's hard to really say that they got worse because they had a worse record in the NFC. They did win the NFC North, which I think was as good as it could have been, and it was as bad as it could have been. I mean, an 8-7-1 record won the NFC North. But there were 3 quarterbacks down. I mean, if you count Minnesota as even having a quarterback, count them down. Cutler went down, and Rodgers went down. We'll talk about the Lions in a minute. So I can't necessarily say that they got better, but they didn't get worse. I mean, 8-7-1 is a very respectable record for having 4 quarterbacks. You know, there was Seneca Wallace, Scott Tolzien, and Matt Flynn. You know, just a medley of guys playing at any time, and they were playing at the bar. They were playing right where they needed to be. So I think that they had no change, which is a good thing for them this year, losing Rodgers. Who's my next team?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What a mess. But I don't think they got any worse. I don't think that people had many expectations for them, and I don't think they really disappointed people. You know, they started off the season with Josh Freeman. Didn't really work out all that well. They picked up Darrelle Revis from the New York Jets. Mike Glennon came in and started being the quarterback, started playing well toward the end of the season. But I don't think that they really got worse. I don't think they really got better. They went 4-12 this season. So I think that it was no change. Not many people had many expectations for them. Who's my last team of no change?
The Dallas Cowboys.
Dallas Cowboys, America's team. Something like that. Tony Romo played well. I mean, there's so many schools of thought on Tony Romo. There's that he's the best quarterback in the regular season. Thought he's the worst quarterback in the regular season. To me, he's a good quarterback. I'm not going to put him in the elite class. I'm not going to put him in the Josh Freeman class. He's a good quarterback, but that defense was so awful. Just terrible. Their defensive line was injured the entire year. I think they used more defensive linemen this year than any other team, more starting defensive linemen than any other team in the NFL. It's hard to have any success with that. And then the game against Denver, as a quarterback, you can't throw for 500 yards and lose. That's not fair to the quarterback. He had 2 interceptions one time. They won near the end of the game in a shootout with the Denver Broncos. But as a quarterback, you shouldn't be able to throw 500 yards and lose. Your defense should be able to pick you up once in a while. So I don't think the Dallas Cowboys really changed. I don't think they necessarily lost because people didn't know what they were going to get out of the Cowboys, and they didn't know what they were going to get out of the Cowboys this year. So I think that they didn't change overall. And that ends the 10 teams that I think did not change. You got Buffalo, San Francisco, Seattle, Jacksonville, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Green Bay, Tampa Bay, and Dallas. So now we go on to my losers, who lost this season, who did worse than their expectations coming in, and or just just looked bad, just failed to live up to their expectations, got worse from last year. So we'll go ahead and get started. Who is my 10th loser?
The Oakland Raiders.
Oakland Raiders. They didn't necessarily have Super Bowl expectations this year, but Terrell Pryor, Darren McFadden, that defense is a little shaky anyway. Woodson coming back. They had to have something in a division where it was very possible for them to go 8-8, and that would have been a winning season for them. Oakland Raiders went 4-12.
Yes.
4-12. In a division, in one of the best divisions in football, which 2 years ago was one of the worst divisions in football, along with the NFC West. So Oakland, who's their quarterback? I think their best move this year was getting rid of Matt Flynn. Matt Flynn made a ton of money off of one game with Green Bay. He went to Seattle, got beat out by Russell Wilson. He went to Oakland, got beat out by Terrell Pryor and by Mike McGlynn. Mike McGloin. I think McGlynn is an offensive lineman. McGloin. I think McGlynn plays for the Indianapolis Colts. McGloin was the quarterback. So Oakland, I think, just kind of fell off a little bit of where they could have been. 6-10 even would have been a decent season. I would have put them in the no change category. But they did not play to the level that I think they should have, and therefore they are my 10th loser. Who's my 9th loser?
The 9th loser is the Tennessee Titans.
Tennessee Titans went 7-9 in one of the weakest divisions in football. Indianapolis won with 11-5 record. Indianapolis would beat teams like San Francisco. They beat them at Candlestick. They beat Seattle at home. They beat Denver at home. They lost to San Diego with 15 points. They lost to St. Louis by 30 points. They lost to Arizona by 30 points. You never knew where you were going to get at in Indianapolis, and Tennessee needed to take advantage of that. They did not. Chris Johnson didn't really know where he was. Jake Locker had a decent season. He wasn't awful. He was injured a couple of times. Had a decent season, but they really needed to take advantage of that AFC South and the opportunities presented to them. Who's my 8th loser?
The 8th loser is the Detroit Lions.
As he says with pride in his voice, to the Detroit Lions. Went 6-3 to start the season. Had control of the NFC North. Absolute control. They were the only team without an injured quarterback. Even though Matthew Stafford was always dinged up. Rodgers, out. Cutler, out, even though McCown played phenomenal. Who is the quarterback in Minnesota? Was it Christian Ponder? Was it Matt Castle? Was it Josh Freeman, who I think was one of the dumbest pickups ever? You didn't know, and the Detroit Lions had to take advantage of that, but they failed. They went 6-3, they ended up 7-9. They won one of their last 7 games. It was very disappointing. It was reminiscent of the season the year previous, where they were 4-4 and struggled to get to 4-4, and then lost 8 of their last games, with Calvin Johnson having over 2,000 receiving yards. That's kind of like the Tony Romo situation. The receiver shouldn't have 2,000 receiving yards and go 4-12. Detroit Lions had control of the NFC North. They beat the Packers finally. They beat the Bears.
That was an awesome game.
Yeah, on Thanksgiving when they just stomped the Packers.
Oh, that was great. I was sleeping for it, because I had to work. But
Scott's a Detroit fan up here in Detroit. But Detroit just failed. They got rid of Jim Schwartz, who is now in Buffalo. Now they have Jim Caldwell. Hopefully they'll bring some discipline, which is what they lack.
Please.
And hopefully they will get better in the future in one of the best divisions in football. Who is my next losing team?
The New York Giants.
The New York Football Giants. Eli Manning threw almost as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. I think he threw more interceptions than he threw touchdowns. He didn't have any receivers. Victor Cruz was injured a lot. Hakeem Nicks was nowhere to be found. They had other receivers. There was no communication. The defense wasn't that great. They just struggled. You watch any of the Giants games and they just looked bad at all facets of the game. They went 0-6 to start. Then they won their next 4, which is every year of Eli Manning's career, they've gone on a streak of 4 or more victories. Just think about that for a second. Every year they've gone on a streak of 4 or more victories. That's ridiculous. No other quarterback has ever even come close to doing that. Peyton Manning hasn't done it. Tom Brady, Terry Bradshaw, Joe Montana, Steve Young. None of those quarterbacks have even done that. Giants ended up 7-9, third best team in the NFC East. They came in, I don't think they necessarily had Super Bowl aspirations. Well, every team has Super Bowl aspirations, Super Bowl expectations from the outside. But 7-9, looking as bad as they did, I definitely don't think that's what they wanted to do. Okay, so who's my next team?
The Minnesota Vikings.
Minnesota Vikings went 5-10-1. Didn't know who their quarterback was. Christian Ponder. Christian, all you had to do was be a mediocre quarterback. 200 yards, 15 for 23, 2 touchdowns and an interception, and that's it. The Minnesota Vikings averaged the most points against in the entire NFL. They averaged giving up 30 points per game. So it wasn't necessarily the quarterback, it's the defense. The defense just looked off. You know, they weren't necessarily slow, they weren't necessarily stupid, there was no pass rush. They just looked bad in all rushing, passing, all of that. They just looked bad. Minnesota, I think, had decent aspirations this year in a division that I predicted them to do fairly well. You know, I thought that they could. I thought they had the chance, but their defense just let them down. Leslie Frazier is no longer the coach in Minnesota, and one of the bright spots for them going forward is Cordarrelle Patterson, dynamic kick returner, wide receiver. Him and Adrian Peterson. You know, Cordarrelle Patterson is kind of the mix of Percy Harvey and Sidney Rice without the injuries. So I'm excited for Cordarrelle Patterson. That's about the only bright spot that the Vikings have going right now, along with Adrian Peterson, but Adrian Peterson is always a bright spot. So Minnesota 5-10-1, very disappointing season for them. Who's next?
The Cincinnati Bengals.
Once again, record does not imply that this team won. They went 11-5 and won the division. They went to play San Diego in the playoffs and lost. In the only game that wasn't decided by a touchdown or less that week, it was 27-10. And it wasn't really that close. Andy Dalton did have a milestone in the playoffs, though. He got his first playoff touchdown.
Woo!
Third playoff game. In 3 playoff games, 2 against Houston, 1 against San Diego, he's had 1 touchdown, 6 interceptions. Really? He's just looked bad. He can't get over that next step. He's kind of reminiscent of Andrew Luck, only Andrew Luck can throw for touchdowns. Andy Dalton needs to get to that next step out of Texas Central. I believe that he has the tangibles. He's in the right division. He just needs to get past that hump. And it's not like he's playing the New England Patriots or the Denver Broncos who are going to stomp all over you. He's playing against the San Diego Chargers, who squeaked into the playoffs. He's playing against the Houston Texans the last 2 years, who have been decent, but not really dynamic. So Andy Dalton and the Cincinnati Bengals, losers for this season. Who's next?
The Baltimore Ravens.
Once again, staying in the AFC North, the Baltimore Ravens went 8-8 this year after the wild card was wide open for them to take. Wide open. Joe Flacco is one of the biggest salaries in the league, which I believe he deserves after winning the Super Bowl. But by paying Joe Flacco, they let go of Anquan Bolden, they let go of Ellersby, they let go of other players that could have helped them that didn't, and most of them went to San Francisco. Bolden went to San Francisco, a couple of their defensive backs went to San Francisco, Ellersby went to Miami. So the Ravens just looked off. They didn't quite put it together. This is the first year that John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco have missed the playoffs. Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh not only went to the playoffs every year of their career together, but they won a playoff game every year of their career together, which is very, very impressive. But they missed the playoffs this year, therefore they are a loser in my mind. Who's my third loser?
The Houston Texans.
Houston Texans. Start off the season 2-0. 2-0, undefeated, baby. Then lost the rest of their games.
Yep.
They just looked bad. Even in their 2 wins, they struggled to get it. Matt Schaub set a record for most pick sixes in consecutive games. He was benched, brought back a couple of times, benched again. I believe he was let go, which is the right move. It's predicted that the Houston Texans will take Johnny Manziel or Terry Bridgewater in the first round. They need a lot more than that. A quarterback does not make a team, but they need other pieces. Matt Schaub, I think, could go to the Oakland Raiders and be a decent player there. Not really much expectation, but could be a veteran off the bench. Could be, I sound like a baseball veteran off the bench. A veteran guy to help a young quarterback, Terrell Pryor, or whoever it is that they're going to stick with in Oakland. I think that he could play there, but Houston just struggled. They just looked bad. They went 12-4 the year before, 2-14 this year. Very disappointing season for the Houston Texans. Who is my number 2 loser?
The number 2 loser is the Washington Redskins.
Washington Redskins, RG3 in his sophomore slump, and I do not blame RG3 for the sophomore slump. Almost every quarterback. It's more rare for quarterbacks to not go in the sophomore slump, like Andrew Luck, than for quarterbacks to do it. The sophomore slump is where it's the second year of a quarterback, where first year you kind of take it by storm. You're able to throw the ball a lot more. Like Andrew Luck would be my example, I guess. Threw a lot of interceptions, but he was in control. They weren't going to bench him. He was the starter. He was the freshman. He was able to kind of take over and change. Sophomore slump is where now you have a year of tape on him. Now you know what he's going to do. Now the offensive coordinator is more strict on what he's going to do. He's going to think about it more. So a lot of quarterbacks go into that sophomore slump and just kind of fall off a little bit. Not many quarterbacks fall off to the level of RG3. I think he came back from his injury too soon. I think they pressed him too much. Mike Shanahan is no longer the coach there, which is the right move. But the special teams, just historically awful for the Washington Redskins. You know, when you think of a team, you think of offensive numbers and defensive numbers, but special teams, field goal kicking, punting, punt return, kick return, just all bad. So I think that was why Washington lost a lot. Kirk Cousins from Michigan State played well the last 2 games. I think he lost both games. There could be trade rumors for either him or RG3. We'll see what happens with that. So Washington Redskins, my second loser for this. Who was my first and worst loser, and or best, depends on your viewpoint, for the 2013-2014 NFL season?
The Atlanta Falcons.
The Atlanta Falcons, 4-12. Third best only because they beat Tampa Bay. Matt Ryan had 4,500 passing yards, which is nothing to scoff at, but of course they were playing from behind a lot. Tony Gonzalez in his final year in his historic, venerable career, Hall of Fame, no doubt about it, career, played on an awful team. Thought he came back because he thought that he was going to have a shot at the Super Bowl. Even last year when Atlanta went 13-3, they didn't look like a 13-3 team. But they came back and they went 4-12, just really bad. The whole team was just bad. I can't really pick one position to really focus in on and say that they were really bad, because the whole team was just slow and couldn't tackle and sluggish and just didn't look like they were really enthused to be there. And Tony Gonzalez, hats off to you. Kudos on a great career. So those are my 10 losers. From top to bottom, there's Oakland, Tennessee, Detroit, New York Giants, Minnesota, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Houston, Washington, and Atlanta. Those are my biggest losers for the 2013-2014 NFL season. And here's where you guys are excited. Who are my winners? Now, if you keep track, there are 22 teams gone. There are 20 teams gone. There are 10 teams left to go. Let's see who my winners are for the 2013-2014 NFL season. Who's my number 12 winner, Scott?
The New England Patriots.
New England Patriots went 12-4 without Gronkowski, without a star wide receiver for a while. Tom Brady's new receiving core. They had, I think, the turning point for the New England Patriots. They were kind of struggling in the first half of the season. Their biggest turning point was when they beat the Saints on the last second. I think there was like 3 seconds left. Touchdown pass to the corner from Tom Brady. I think that really turned them around. They went 12-4. In the AFC East, a very decent division with Miami and New York and Buffalo. A very decent. I think that's kind of contradictory to even say that. A decent division. They're my number 12 because, they went to the third straight AFC title game. You would think that would get them higher, but people expected them to go to the third straight AFC title game. They met expectations, but they still won because they had new receivers. Tom Brady proved how great he is. They were able to overcome those obstacles against 2 teams, the New York Jets, who were mediocre but could have. They didn't have much talent, but Rex Ryan, and we'll talk about that in a second. Rex Ryan coaching job really made them improve. In Miami, who was hot to start off with. And who knows what they would have done without the incognito debacle. So they are my number 12 winner. Who's next?
The Miami Dolphins.
Miami Dolphins. I think they started off 3-0, 4-0, and then incognito kind of came around. Lost the left side of their line with that whole thing. I'm not going to go into that debate. But they really could have fallen off. They could have ended up 5-11. They could have really had a bad season. But they didn't. They went 8-8. They could have made the wild card. Tannehill had a good season. Ellersby on a linebacking core had a good season. Wallace had a decent season. A wide receiver from Pittsburgh came and played for Miami. So the 8-8 was a decent year. Miami wasn't all that great the year before. They played well against almost every team. They beat the Colts early on. They played well against the Patriots, even though they lost. They played well against the Jets. They're rolling. They're going. They're moving in the right direction, and therefore they are a winner to me. Who is my 10th winning team?
The New Orleans Saints.
New Orleans Saints, first season back, and they went 11-5 with Sean Payton at the helm. Sean Payton, of course, was suspended for a year, involved in the bounty scandal. First year back with Drew Brees, and it really showed how much they missed Sean Payton. Rob Ryan being the defensive coordinator there, good defense. I think they're top 10 in the league with their defense, but they struggled to win on the road. In the regular season, they were 4-4 on the road. They won on the road in Philadelphia, first in the wild card round of the playoffs, and then went to Seattle and lost again. They did that in the regular season as well, previously in the regular season as well. So New Orleans is my 10th best winner. Drew Brees had a great season. Jimmy Graham, who is probably going to get franchised, which he's not overly happy about. they're going to remain in New Orleans. So they're my 10th best winner. Who was my 9th winner?
The New York Jets.
So 3 of the 4 teams in the AFC East are winners. New York Jets, Mark Sanchez injured in preseason, and I'm probably one of the last people in the Mark Sanchez camp. I believe that he should be the starting quarterback moving forward. You can't... Okay, we won't go into that. We'll make that a rant of the day, is Mark Sanchez. We'll write that down and we'll do that. Geno Smith came in, first-year quarterback, was not really happy about going to New York. Rex Ryan had a phenomenal season coaching a really mediocre team. They went 8-8, which was a win for me, a win for them. Keeping Rex Ryan for the future, that's also a win for the New York Jets. Look for them to get better in the future. You didn't know what you were going to get this season. So New York Jets going 8-8, a win in my book. Next.
Number 8, Chicago Bears. Da Bears.
Da Bears. Da Bears. Chicago Bears went 8-8 this season without Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler's been injured the last 3 years, but he has a 75% winning percentage, 66% winning percentage with Cutler in the game. Cutler, I think, is the MVP of this team, no doubt. McCown, I believe his first name is Josh McCown, played very well coming up off the bench. He beat the Dallas Cowboys, he beat a couple of other teams, played very, very well. A lot of people wanted him to remain as the quarterback, and I think Mark Trestman, the first-year coach, Canadian football coach before this, he was in the NFL previously as a coach, but then he went and was a head coach in Canada. He did very well with Jay Cutler, saying that Jay Cutler is my guy. He will be my starting quarterback. There was a lot of controversy around that. Jay Cutler just got signed to a big contract, which I think he earns as long as he stays healthy. Bears can go 12-4 every season from here on out if Cutler can stay healthy. I think winning without Jay Cutler proves that they are a winning team and that they are a good team. They played against the Packers well, except for that fourth quarter play where Rodgers just threw it over everybody. So the Bears had a winning season this year, even though their record was a 500 record. Next team.
The Arizona Cardinals.
One of my Cinderella story teams, one of my favorite teams to watch this year. Bruce Arians, former Indianapolis coach. He went 9-3 with Indianapolis, as it went on Chuck Pagano's record, but he went 9-3 with the Indianapolis Colts. He went 10-6, so in 2 years he's 19-6 or 19-9 in 2 years, which is great. Not many coaches can say that. They went 10-6 and missed the playoffs. Even if they would have beaten San Francisco, New Orleans had won. Arizona did not play. I think they went 3-3 in their division, or 2-4. Did not play very well in their division, but they beat a lot of teams out of their division. Arizona's a very good team with Carson Palmer, Larry Fitzgerald, Patrick Peterson. Look for them to really improve next year. The NFC West, I think, is going to be the best division of football. I think the Rams, the worst team could be 9-7 in the St. Louis Rams. And I only say that because I think Arizona, San Francisco, and Seattle are just better than the Rams, even with Sam Bradford. So look out for that division. That could be a very impressive division. But Arizona, 10-6. Vastly improved from last year, came high above expectations this year. They are my number 7 winner for this year. Who's my number 6 winner?
The number 6 winner is the Denver Broncos.
Here comes in a little bit of controversy. Best offense in NFL history. Quarterbacks setting records. They had a great running game. They had a good enough defense. They're my number 6 winner. This is not going to change regardless of who wins the Super Bowl. They are my winner because they were expected to make the Super Bowl. I mean, they really were. I think that what made them a winner was Peyton Manning beating Tom Brady in the AFC title game. And not just beating him, but pretty easily beating him. It wasn't all that close of a game. Tom Brady took a long time to get a touchdown. Peyton Manning just looked better. 400 yards, no interceptions, just looked good. They were predicted to go to the Super Bowl, though, and they met expectations. If they win the Super Bowl, they're obviously the winners. You can't refute that, but I think that because they were expected to go, and they did go, I think they are winners, but they're not my number 1 winner. Who's my number 5?
The number 5 winner is the Seattle Seahawks.
Once again, just because they made the Super Bowl doesn't mean that they are my number 1 winner. They were expected to go to the Super Bowl. There were a couple of teams in the NFC that were, Atlanta was looked at early on. Philadelphia was kind of mid-season they were looked at. You had New Orleans. San Francisco was predicted a lot, but Seattle, best defense in the league. You can't beat them in Seattle. The only team to do that this year was Arizona, 17-10 after Carson Palmer threw 4 interceptions. That was Seattle not executing. Russell Wilson has gotten a lot of flack for being a game manager instead of being a gamer. I still don't know why people aren't up in arms about that. I just don't get it. They were complimenting Russell Wilson on being a game manager when he's winning. When you're a game manager and winning, you're awesome. When you're a game manager and losing, you're mediocre. Same thing with Alex Smith. Alex Smith is a great game manager. He went 11-5. He's did very good things in Kansas City. So I think being a game manager, it's not Russell Wilson's fault. He relied on his defense, which is a lot of what Terry Bradshaw did. Pittsburgh Steelers, the Steel Curtain, relied on his defense. And how many Super Bowls did Terry Bradshaw win? 4.
Wow.
Terry Bradshaw won 4, and he was a game manager. He was a good enough quarterback. He wasn't a stellar quarterback. He wasn't going to throw for 600 yards in a game, but he was a good enough quarterback to make up for his defense. 4 Super Bowls for Terry Bradshaw, Hall of Famer.
Wow.
I'm not saying that about Russell Wilson, but you can't expect him to be. And he has a hat. Who knows who his wide receiver is going to be? Percy Harvin has only played 2 games this year. The guy they picked up from Minnesota, the guy they expected to be the dynamic player, hasn't done a whole lot this year. So I compliment Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch, beast mode. Beast mode to play very well in the Super Bowl. I think it will be a very good game. Who's my number 4 winner, Scott?
The number 4 winner is the Kansas City Chiefs.
Best turnaround in football, 2-14 to 11-5. They started off 9-0, lost 2 of their last 7 games, lost to the Indianapolis Colts twice in 3 weeks, 45-44 in the wild card game. Alex Smith and Andy Reid and Jamal Charles and Dwayne Bowe and Dexter McCluster and Derek Thomas and all those guys, Poe, playing stellar in Kansas City. Look for them to really improve in the future. Had decent expectations for them this year, even with Alex Smith and Andy Reid. People knew they were going to get better. They had 6 Pro Bowlers last year, and they went 2-14. That says a lot about your team. But they vastly improved, and they're one of my favorite teams to watch during the regular season as they played well. They played well against Denver twice, which hardly anybody can say that. So they're my number 4 winner because they really improved this year. And I look for good things to come from them. Who is my number 3 winner? Top 3, if you've been counting down the 29 teams that I've already listed, you'll know who's left. But for those who haven't really been paying that close of attention, here's my number 3 winner.
The number 3 winner is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Philadelphia Eagles. Chip Kelly comes from Oregon. High-flying offense, tons of points, new scheme, never know what you're going to get. Kind of. Michael Vick was thought to be the guy there, big arm, fast runner. Turns out that he was not the guy. What you apparently needed was Nick Foles. Not all that fast of a runner, decent arm. He threw 7 touchdowns against the Oakland Raiders. Only one person had thrown for 7 touchdowns since 1960. 2 people did it this season. Peyton Manning and Nick Foles. Where did Nick Foles come from? He ended up the season with 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. That's video game stats. Right there. Nick Foles was incredible this year. And their offense, LaShawn McCoy, just outstanding this year. 10-6, they played very well. Didn't know what you were going to get in the NFC East. Thought that maybe 9-7 was going to win that, but I think by going 10-6, they kind of raised the bar a little bit. I look for exciting things in that division, one of the worst divisions in football in the NFC East. Philadelphia Eagles to really improve on that and be better next year. Who's my number 2 winner, Scott?
The number 2 winner is the Carolina Panthers.
Carolina, Cam Newton finally played like he knew what he was doing. He won 8 straight games, Carolina, one of the best defenses. Ron Rivera finally coming around, starting to play well. Very, very improved and exceeded expectations of what they were supposed to do. Atlanta was supposed to be the hot team in the NFC South. Carolina became the hot team in the NFC South. Not many people expected Carolina, who went 12-4, to challenge the 11-5 New Orleans Saints in the NFC South, but they did, and they split. Carolina beat New Orleans at home. New Orleans beat Carolina at home. Very good season by Cam Newton. Very good defense. Kuechly in the middle of that defense. Cam Newton just looked better, and you can't really necessarily put a lot of emphasis on the quarterback for winning games. But I think Cam Newton really did that. He looked like a game manager, a guy who was aware of his surroundings, who didn't necessarily run because he could. He ran because he needed to. Once in a while he would run because he could. Ron Rivera took a lot of chances with him. It paid off very well. So look for exciting things to come from Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers in the future. And that leaves one team to be my winner for the 2013 season. Who would that be, Scott?
The San Diego Chargers.
San Diego Chargers. A lot of people, myself included, thought Phillip Rivers was done. They lost their head coach in Norv Turner. The offense just wasn't looking that good. Defense was shaky at best. Never really knew what you were going to get. Oh yeah, they went 9-7 and made the playoffs this year. Beat Denver in Denver during the regular season. Only one of 3 teams. I mentioned this last week or 2 weeks ago that of the 4 remaining teams, Denver included, the 3 teams that had beat Denver all were in the playoffs. So Denver had to beat 2 of the 3 teams that beat them in the regular season to make the Super Bowl. But San Diego, I think just 9-7 just blasted away a lot of people, myself included. Phillip Rivers, if it wasn't for Peyton Manning, I believe Phillip Rivers would have won the MVP. Now technically no one's won the MVP yet. Who's going to say that Peyton Manning isn't the MVP? Really? Phillip Rivers had an outstanding year, played well in the playoffs. His team looked good. He can't quite make it through the playoffs, but look for exciting things to come from them. Look for the San Diego Chargers to challenge the Denver Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. I think both Western divisions are going to be very good this year, with the NFC being a little better because their worst team in St. Louis is better than the AFC West's worst team in Oakland. So those are my winners and losers. My winners, 12-1, New England, Miami, New Orleans, the New York Jets, Chicago Bears, Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos, Seahawks, Chiefs, Eagles, Carolina, and my number 1 winner, the San Diego Chargers. So those are my winners and losers. Now, if you disagree with me, which you probably do, saying that Denver and Seattle should be number 1 and number 2, please let me know. I want you to know at SVSU Iowa, svsuiowa@gmail.com. And now for my Super Bowl prediction. I'll just make this very quick, like I did last week, which I was right on both accounts. Just saying. I think that being at a neutral site, which, Eli Manning played in Indianapolis in 2011, which was Peyton Manning's home. Peyton Manning is playing in Eli Manning's home in East Rutherford at MetLife Stadium, the new MetLife Stadium. I think Peyton Manning's offense in a neutral site will be too much for the Seattle defense. I think it will be a very good game. The last 10 Super Bowls, except for the 2002 Super Bowl between Tampa Bay and Oakland, the last 10 Super Bowls, 10-11 Super Bowls have been very competitive, which is awesome, which is what you want to see. But I think Denver will just be too much for Seattle this year. So I believe Denver will win. I believe it'll be 42-27. And a game that's closer than that. I think a late score or a fumble interception recovery, something like that, will cause it to be kind of like the 2009 Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints, where it was 27-17, and then Peyton Manning was intercepted to make it 34. Or no, it was 24-17. Peyton Manning was intercepted to make it 31-17. I think something like that will happen. So the score is a little wider than what I think the game will actually be. But I think Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos will beat Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks. So that's our winners and losers. Thanks, Scott Anderson, for helping me out.
You're welcome.
I'm Steve. Please ask me any questions, yell at me, do whatever you need to. We'll be back next week with a slight Super Bowl preview. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of it because everybody's going to be talking about the Super Bowl. So we'll see you guys next week, and thank you very much for watching.